The Civil War was the most traumatic event in American history. But did you know that the Civil War was brewing for decades before the first shot was fired? And when that first shot was fired, it didn't start the Civil War immediately. It actually took months. So what caused the Civil War? And how did a single shot start the deadliest conflict in American history? Hello and welcome to my channel. This is the first episode in our brand new series all about the American Civil War. The American Civil War didn't just erupt overnight. It was the result of decades of growing tension between the North and the South. Now, we could spend hours talking about all of the causes of the Civil War. But there's one central cause to the Civil War that historians generally agree on: slavery. Now, slavery had been a part of the American South since the first colonial days, but its future was thrown into question as the United States grew. The issue of slavery comes up again and again throughout American history. After the American Revolution, states north of the Mason-Dixon line largely ended slavery, while those below it kept it. But as the United States grew, the question of slavery in new territories sparked intense debate. Should new territories be admitted to the Union as slave states? Should slavery be expanded? Should it be contained? Should it be abolished? Each time this question was raised, it split the country in two. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, and drew a line across the continent prohibiting slavery north of that line. But that compromise only delayed the inevitable. In 1850, California was admitted to the Union as a free state, throwing off the balance of power. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for popular sovereignty to decide the issue of slavery in these new territories. Basically, let the people decide if they wanted slavery or not. Well, that led to an intense period of violence known as Bleeding Kansas, as pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces battled for control of these territories. Then came the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which ruled that Congress had no right to prohibit slavery in the territories. Basically, slavery was going to expand across the entire United States, unless something drastic happened. We know that something drastic did happen. In 1860, the Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln for president. The Republican Party was newly formed and was dedicated to keeping slavery out of the territories. Southerners saw Lincoln's election as a direct threat to slavery and their way of life. In fact, the slogan of free soil, free labor, free men became the rallying cry of the Republican Party, promising that under their leadership, slavery would not expand 1 inch further in the United States. When Lincoln won the election of 1860, 7 states from the Deep South seceded from the Union, followed by 4 more border states. They met in a convention in Montgomery, Alabama, in February of 1861, and created a new government with Jefferson Davis as its president. They called themselves the Confederate States of America. And then when Abraham Lincoln took office, 6 more slave states seceded from the Union. That's 17 states gone. But Lincoln didn't want to go to war over slavery, at least not yet. He tried to avoid conflict with the Confederacy, but he also did not recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate government. Instead, he focused on preserving the Union. But for the Confederacy, it was clear that the best chance to succeed was to strike first. If they could win a battle early on, maybe they could scare the border states away from the Union. Perhaps if they captured Washington, D.C., they could persuade the North to simply let them leave the Union without a fight. So Confederate leaders hatched a plan to attack Fort Sumter, an American fort located on an island in the middle of Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. Why this fort? Well, Fort Sumter was the last vestige of federal power in the entire South. And when it fell, the Confederacy would fully control all 3 of the southern states bordering the Atlantic Ocean. It's kind of creating a buffer zone between the Confederacy and the rest of the United States. But the U.S. wasn't about to give up this fort without a fight. Major Robert Anderson, the commander of Fort Sumter, knew that his supplies were low and that Confederate forces were massing around the harbor. So he sent messages to Washington begging for reinforcements. But Anderson's pleas went unanswered. No reinforcements were coming. On April 1861, the Confederates began bombarding the fort. For 2 days, cannons roared as the Confederates fired over 4,000 shots at the fort. On April 1861, after running out of ammunition, Anderson surrendered the fort to Confederate General Pierre G.T. Beauregard. And with that, the American Civil War had begun. So why did the Civil War start with this battle? Why not somewhere else? Well, Fort Sumter was one of only 2 forts in the entire Confederacy that actually housed federal troops, so it was really the only option for the Confederacy if they wanted to prove themselves in battle. Not to mention, this was a perfect opportunity for the Confederacy to score an easy victory. The Confederate artillery was significantly more powerful than the smoothbore cannons housed in the fort. Plus, the Confederates greatly outnumbered the Union defenders. Of the 344 Americans trapped in the fort, 200 of them were soldiers, while the other 144 were civilians, including women and children. So it was a pretty easy win for the Confederacy. President Abraham Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down this rebellion, calling it a, quote, temporary stay to the threatened disruption of the Union. But Lincoln also knew that it would take a lot longer than a few months to subdue the South. Historian James M. McPherson writes, even after the fall of Sumter, Lincoln believed it possible to avert civil war. His first call for troops was based on the assumption that the secession crisis was temporary, and that most Southerners did not really want to fight a war to establish a separate government. But here's where things get tricky. While it was a tactical victory for the Confederacy, it was a strategic defeat because the attack on Fort Sumter galvanized the North behind the flag. Lincoln used the attack to great effect. In his call for troops, he stated, "He who sheds blood with us will be our brother. He who works with us will be our friend. He who gives his life for us shall become our citizen." And that message was received loud and clear. Thousands of Northerners volunteered to fight for the Union Army. Anti-slavery advocates who were unsure about the war effort were convinced to support it. Even some pro-slavery Democrats from border states like Maryland joined the Union Army. Historian William C. Davis explains, the firing on Fort Sumter had effects far beyond the death and injury of a handful of soldiers, galvanized Northern opinion, and removed the last possibility of compromise. And so it was that a single shot fired almost 160 years ago today kicked off the bloodiest conflict in American history. It was the beginning of 4 years of unimaginable horror, of brothers fighting against brothers, of neighbors turning on neighbors, of fathers watching their sons die on distant battlefields. Over 600,000 soldiers would die during the Civil War, more than in all of America's other wars combined. But the Civil War wasn't just about battles and generals and flags and uniforms. It was about the very soul of America, about whether a nation built on liberty could stay together while upholding that liberty for all of its citizens. It was a struggle over slavery and states' rights and tariffs and taxes and nationalism and compromise and a whole host of other issues. But ultimately, it was a struggle over the meaning of America itself. Did America stand for liberty and freedom for all, or did it stand for nothing at all? Ultimately, the Civil War was about whether the United States could, would, and should endure. And the answer to that question still echoes today. The Civil War may be over, but its story is not. And now, we have brought that story to you every week through a podcast. In each episode, I bring you the stories of the Civil War, one battle, one person, or 1 year at a time. New episodes are released every Wednesday. You can find us anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And remember, you can help keep this channel going by liking this video and subscribing for more.